Almost every species in the galaxy has, at some point, used kinetic weaponry in combat. There are outliers, of course. The Zealous had an atmosphere that was very conducive to the use of energy weapons and effectively skipped straight to that phase of weapon technology. The Lingola saw projectile weaponry as dishonorable and vehemently refused to use it, and apparently always have. It likely has to do with their poor distance vision as well. There are more species with similar stories, but at the end of the day most, in fact almost 95% of all intergalactic species, favor energy weapons for their militaries. Humans were a part of that 5% that did not. This wasn't because they didn't have energy weapons. They did. It was mainly because their kinetic weapons just seemed to suit them well enough. Despite their war-laden history, mankind actually didn't engage in a real interstellar war for nearly 3 centuries. They fought themselves plenty of times, small skirmishes and a handful of full-blown civil wars, but as far as actual wars with other species, they had actually remained quite peaceful, typically opting for diplomatic solutions to conflicts on the galactic stage. When war finally came to their door, mankind seemed woefully outmatched. Their opponents, the Matec, had been a spacefaring society for almost twice as long as humanity. They had more resources, more people, and better technology. Indeed, many in the galaxy thought that the humans were destined to lose and either be destroyed or enslaved by their new enemies. For the first few battles, it had seemed that their prediction was going to come true. Human fleets fought well and acquitted themselves with great honor, but ultimately they were losing ground. This continued for almost 3 years until the Battle of Relay 5. Relay 5 was a human agriculture and vacation world, very popular among visitors who preferred nice temperate climates and recreation involving mountainous regions. But that's not important. What was important was the fact that the relay system was almost overpopulated by planetary bodies, having 18 different planets, planetoids, gas giants, and too many moons to count. Coupled with the fact that several of these celestial bodies had higher density and, as a result, stronger gravity wells, the relay system was perfect for the new human battle strategy. All throughout human history, the ability to predict an object's trajectory has been crucial to human survival and advancement. In ancient history, the ability to throw a spear or sling a rock accurately could mean the difference between death or survival, often determining the result of a hunt or battle between tribes. As human technology progressed, so too did the need to be able to accurately fire projectiles. Bows, cannons, muskets, and eventually artillery and sniper rifles became the go-to weapons of choice for both recreational shooters and military arms across human society. Human snipers and artillery crews effectively reached firing ranges so great that, in order to accurately hit a target, they actually had to factor in wind, humidity, and even the curvature of the Earth and how it would rotate beneath their bullet. This didn't change when mankind entered the interstellar stage. Indeed, mankind only entered space in the first place by being able to gauge their planet's gravitational pull and what it would take to escape it. Rockets, exuding great plumes of fire and smoke, fired like missiles into the great void above the Earth and curved off into the skies, where mankind first entered space. It was because of this seemingly instinctive understanding of ballistics and trajectories that human snipers and human artillery became some of the most sought-after ground forces in almost any conflict. A human artillery unit with enough information about a planet's gravity well and atmosphere, or at least time to calculate them, could target enemies beyond the horizon. Human snipers could target enemy leaders from far enough away that their projectiles wouldn't even read on the enemy's base sensors until it was too late. At the relay system, the human 603rd Defensive Fleet, known as the Valhalla's Raiders, used these skills to turn the tide of the war between mankind and the Matec. The Raiders had known that an attack was coming. Relay was the next system in line, as the Matec forces had been advancing, so it only made sense. When the Matec came back into real space, their position had been predicted fairly accurately. The humans, after all, had been fighting for almost 3 years. They knew that their opponents liked to showboat a bit before engaging in battles that they expected to win. Previously, the only times when human ships had managed to destroy any of the Matec ships was when they had managed to flank or surround them or managed to slip fighters past their defensive turrets to destroy vital systems. Needless to say, once the Matec had noticed this weakness, they had begun preventing it from being exploited. Any time the human fleets had tried to flank them, they had spread out to prevent it, and they began to always deploy their own fighters en masse and kept their most heavily turreted ships strategically located to intercept the human fighters. They did precisely that at Relay. They spread themselves wide enough to prevent an easy flanking maneuver. They launched thousands of fighters, powered their shields up, and then they approached the Valhalla's raiders confidently. The raiders focused their ship's generators specifically on their shields. Their shields were not as effective as the Matec shields but were still capable of weathering a fair amount of enemy fire before failing. This was in part because their shields were made using some stolen Matec technology. Unlike the human shields, though, Matec shields were directionally focused. They concentrated on specific areas of the ship as needed and only encompassed the whole ship when the ship wasn't being used in battle. That was the Matec fleet's only real weakness. As the Matec fleet approached, the raiders did nothing. They didn't fire their weapons, despite being easily capable of reaching the Matec from their position. They didn't begin advancing or falling back. All the raiders did was wait. Seeing the enemy shields at maximum, the Matec fleet commander, Royal Unvast, became confused. He asked all of his subordinate captains if they knew what the pathetic human fleet was doing. Were they surrendering? Were their ships malfunctioning? Was there some show of bravado, a bluff to try to intimidate the Matec? There was no solid answer. None of the Matec had ever seen the humans act like this in battle. Curious, Vast Hand sent a message to the human fleet before him. "What are you doing?" It read. Matec and humans couldn't communicate directly due to biological differences, so communication between the two species was text-based. "In approximately 5 minutes, you will know." That was the simple response. What happens in 5 minutes? It's a surprise. Frustrated, and, though he wouldn't admit it, somewhat curious, Vast Hand ordered his fleet to wait. The humans had never been a real threat to his fleet in the first place. No fleet in the galaxy could match the Matec attack, not as far as he was concerned. If the pathetic humans wanted to try some new tactic, he would let them. Then he would crush them. He was mistaken in this belief. After 4 minutes, the raider fleet began advancing. The Matec commander assumed that whatever plan they had been trying had failed, or that they were finally bringing it to bear for this battle. The Matec began reacting, moving forward, charging their weapons, and preparing boarding craft. Just as they began moving, almost every ship in their fleet began to receive warnings of a meteor strike, and a massive one at that. By then, it was already too late. Their shields had been focused on stopping whatever the humans had been about to send their way. Their sides and rear only had enough shielding to keep cosmic radiation from cooking them inside their ships. To say they were unprepared for what happened was an understatement. Matec ships began to take impacts. Many of the smaller ships were destroyed almost immediately, their great reactor explosions making the situation many times worse. Vast Hand had no idea what was happening. What is hitting us? He thought, even as his own capital ship began to feel the impacts. He yelled for his second-in-command to have the ship scan the incoming projectiles and begin firing at whatever was sending them. This didn't make any sense. They were being hit from every side except the one they should have been getting hit from. He noticed that the human fleet had stopped in its tracks and was simply watching as his fleet was torn apart. Furiously, Royal Unvast Hand ran to his bridge's main view screen, screaming at the cursed humans. Seconds later, his ship's reactor exploded. For just a brief moment, there was a small red star where it had been. Then there was no Matec fleet remaining. The strategy had been so simple that it had almost seemed like it couldn't work when it was suggested. Humans are good at one thing above all others: firing kinetic weapons with trajectories that only they could understand. So, several days before the Matec were expected to arrive, every ship in the Valhalla's raiders had fired every weapon they had. Cannons of all calibers, machine guns, missiles that were set to explode only upon impact, and even a few boarding pods loaded with C4 were fired in all different directions. Millions of rounds were fired. When all was said and done, their trajectories had all been calculated. Some were intended to circle around Relay 5, some around its moons. None of them were fired directly at the expected entry point of the Matec. All they had to do to make it work was calculate correctly and get the Matec to maneuver into the correct spot. But nobody is as accurate as a human sniper.